A new study is providing hope for Alzheimer's patients. Also, there's a new link between ultra-processed foods and cancer. Dr. Nesochi Okeke Igbokwe is joining us now with more. Welcome back to the program. Let us start with the Alzheimer's news. What is going on? There's new treatment. I understand that's maybe a breakthrough.
It may be a breakthrough, and people are getting very excited about this. Essentially, researchers studied mice who had Alzheimer's-like traits, and what they did was that they essentially eliminated an enzyme called BACE1 from these mice. Now, we have to understand what BACE1 does. This enzyme has the property to increase an amyloid, a certain kind of peptide in the brain, which is usually responsible for some of the symptoms of Alzheimer's that we see. So by removing and eliminating this enzyme, they reduced some of the symptoms of cognitive impairment and memory loss in these mice.
How do they remove the enzyme? That's basically the plaque that they talk about that forms on the brain, right?
Exactly. So in the mice model that they studied, they essentially knocked out and deleted a gene that expresses high levels of this enzyme.
Okay, we talk about these breakthroughs and we talk about the experiments with the mice, and the next question, of course, is anybody who has family members with Alzheimer's, okay, when am I going to see something like this? What's the timeline?
The timeline essentially is anywhere from 7 to 10 years after they initiate the first phase of the clinical trials. And right now, they're in the very early stages of trying to see if they can find any kind of treatment for humans. The thing that people have to be aware of, though, sometimes the breakthroughs that we see in the model with mice doesn't necessarily translate into success for human beings. So there's still a ways to go with the clinical trials and experimentation on the few participants that are part of the study at this time.
And there remains very few treatments for Alzheimer's, right? There are some drugs that show signs of some delays.
Exactly. Right? But there's still nothing there that's actually helping to reverse some of the major symptoms. So this gives us some kind of promise that perhaps if they can target this enzyme and inhibit it in human beings, then maybe we can see some kind of improvement.
Okay, let's move on to unprocessed food. Actually, it's ultra-processed food, which is not the good stuff, is it?
Yeah. It's not the good stuff by any means.
Yeah.
Researchers are actually looking at, or what they looked at was what they're calling ultra-processed foods, foods that are pretty much made in factories, foods that are ready to eat, foods that are sugary, like soft drinks, and basically these are foods with lots of additives and components that are not healthy for you.
And very few good components.
Very few good components. These are not. This has no nutritional value.
And these foods play a big role in obesity?
These foods are known to play a huge role in obesity. And what we know in general, obesity is linked to many other comorbidities and issues, and some other studies have even shown that obesity is linked to certain cancers as well.
You know, we all have to be careful of what we eat, but we don't often know what's in the food. And if you live in New York, you're probably eating out 5 meals a day. Mm-hmm. How can we do a better job of knowing what's in it?
The best thing to do is to prepare your meals at home and look to getting more fresh foods. When we talk about fresh foods and unprocessed foods, we're looking at things that have not changed its form in any way. So you get your produce, your vegetables, and you just make sure you have a range and assortment of the different vegetables on your plate daily. If you're making your food at home, it makes it easier for you to really assess what is actually going into your body.
Okay, speaking of things you should not be eating, we've been hearing about this a lot on the news. These are the Tide Pods.
Yes.
They're used for washing your clothes, but what are teenagers doing with these?
There's something called the Tide Pod Challenge. It's the newest and latest craze with teens, and it started off somewhat of a joke. Essentially, as you see, those Tide Pods look a little bit like candy, so the joke was, if it looks like candy, why not pop it in my mouth and eat it and see what happens? So they're doing this to try to get likes and attention on social media, but there's so many dangers associated with ingesting one of these.
Yeah, what are some of the dangers? I mean, this is basically soap and other contaminants.
Exactly. So there are a lot of chemicals that are in one of these pods, and it's a little bit different from just regular laundry detergent in that this is more concentrated. And some of the components include ethanol and other agents that are caustic agents, meaning that they can erode and burn the esophagus and the airway if you do ingest them.
And for children who may not know better, you're right, they do look like candy, and I wonder if Tide is possibly going to be redesigning these packages.
So there have been some talks and some initiatives to change some of the packaging to look a little bit more opaque so that it's not really something that children would see as a candy that they'd want to put in their mouth and in their system.
Okay, and the key is if someone challenges you, don't do stupid things like this.
Don't do things like this because it can actually cause death. Seizures, coma, these are things that have happened to people that have ingested some of these items. It's dangerous. It's not safe at all.
Nesochi, thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you for having me.